Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So as I had promised previously, I would be doing a more in-depth or a deep dive in the implementation phase of the 7-step sourcing process. So today I'm going to be jumping in and talking about the implementation best practices and how you can keep these things in your mind as you go about implementing your contract or your negotiated deals and terms. So with that, let's jump right into the video. All right, guys, so we're jumping right into implementation best practices. All right, so first of all, let's define what is implementation. So implementation in general is the process of putting your plan in effect. So this plan could be a contract for goods, it could be a contract for services. So whatever you have negotiated, you want to put that into effect so that you can get the value or extract the value from that negotiated contract. So for a successful implementation, you need to have either a implementation plan or an implementation roadmap. So we're going to be looking into what those two things are and seeing what would be more apt for your project. But before we jump into that aspect of roadmap versus a plan, the first thing that you need to do, and it's a requirement or requisite, is to initiate or notify and initiate a contract workflow. So what does that mean? So first of all, what you need to do is you need to notify the vendor that won about with a contingent award. And as I mentioned earlier, the contingent award is basically contingent upon a successful execution of the contract. And then what you do is basically you initiate this whole process in parallel with your contracts team so that they can start looking at the terms and conditions and making sure that everything is ironed out. Once you have this done, what you can also do is also notify the non-awarded vendors that they did not win the business. And in general, you can provide some high-level feedback. But of course, you can also provide additional feedback offline. But the key idea is that you're communicating to different folks. And most importantly, you're initiating the contract workflow with your contracts team. All right. So with that, let's jump right into the roadmap versus plan. So what's a roadmap or what is a plan in the context of a implementation is that, first of all, you need to decide which one you want to use. So implementation plan is like a project plan. It has a clear start and end date. The plan calls out for the required resources. It also calls out for the assigned deliverables. It talks about the resources that are tasked that are needed to be able to successfully finish this implementation. A implementation roadmap is a more elaborate sort of, I would say, a map, in other words, because some of these implementations that you're looking to do might require multiple instances or might be across different entities. So for example, if you're doing a travel agency implementation and you are a global company, you're not going to be able to capture all the key deliverables, requirements, and milestones for all the different sites in a plan. Because you might not be going live with every single site at the same time. So in this case, a roadmap is needed because this will allow you to make sure that you can go live one after the other or one after the other in terms of locations. On the other hand, think, for example, you're trying to do a software implementation like an ERP system. You might not necessarily go live with every single module from day one. You might actually do a phased approach. So in other words, a implementation roadmap is more of a phased approach on how you want to implement the contract they've negotiated. So to be able to differentiate these two things, you need to understand if there's any dependencies. So for example, if you're going to do an ERP system implementation, you want to understand what are the different modules that you want to go live with. So take, for example, SAP, you've got MM, which is materials management, you've got PP, which is production planning, and you got QM. So you will generally would want to go forward with, let's say, MM first. And if you're doing MM, because that allows you to set up the materials, that allows you to set up the processes, the bill of materials, and then from that point onwards, you will actually try to build the other phases out. So the implementation will take place in different phases, but the importance is to understand if a plan or a roadmap is needed. And the way to differentiate that is to understand how complex is your project and maybe how many sites are involved, as well as if there's a phased approach needed to be able to go live. So this is the differentiation between the roadmap or plan. So the best way to decide is to kind of work with your stakeholders, understand how they want to go live, or in some cases also, when you have some certain products that are, say, niche or specific to a certain manufacturer, you might not necessarily be able to go live all at once. So if, let's say, you're buying 100 different types of screws, but there's a certain screw, a certain size that your incumbent supplier provides, and it'll take time for the other vendor or your new vendor to ramp up, then you might not go live for all the items. You might go live for a certain subset of the items that you want to share and you want to kind of go forward with. So it just depends I would say. And I think that's something that you'll start hearing from me a lot in the supply chain realm, that is that it depends is a key piece. So it's important to understand the impacts and the implications as to what would happen if you go live in a big bang theory, a big bang approach, or if you actually go from a phased approach. All right, so what are the other key aspects of a successful implementation? So the first thing I would say is to understand the current state. So what does that mean? So first of all, you want to understand what is your final exit date. So if you have an existing contract with the vendor, you want to understand when is the last date that you need to cut off, and when is the first date that the new contract, the new vendor is going to come on board. You also need to understand what are the current commitments. Sometimes you might actually have equipment that you're renting from the existing vendor or the incumbent vendor. So you need to understand if there is a buyout clause on those equipments, if you're planning on using the equipments, or if there's a buyback program, because in some of these leases, they require you to pay the full amount. So if you are coming out of a contract with a vendor, there's a high chance that you might actually have to pay a certain amount or a penalty amount. So that's the commitment piece. And then you also need to understand what is the coverage of items. So sometimes you might actually have a contract that is just focused on the service piece, and there might be some items tied to it. So you need to understand if your new contract that you're trying to implement addresses the items as well as the service, or if it's just focusing on certain one portion, which is the service aspect of it. Therefore, putting the responsibility of buying the material on you or on the new vendor. So it's important to understand what does the current contract cover. So that is the current state aspect of it. Then if you're looking at transitioning from a vendor that provides goods, from a raw material vendor from going from A to B, you need to understand what's your current on-hand inventory. So this is really important because this actually impacts your financials and also impacts the overall, I would say, success rate of this, of the implementation. Because one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to transition too soon where you have an on-hand inventory, which you need to consume, but before that, you're actually buying up new inventory. The second piece is that you don't want to run out of the product. So you need to plan this out properly. So you need to understand how much inventory you have on hand. You need to understand how many days or months will it cover. What is your cutover strategy? So there are different strategies that are used. One strategy is called use to convert. So an example would be you are buying, latex gloves that are used in a certain environment, and you have, say, 100 cases of those. It doesn't make sense for you to return them and buy brand new. So you could literally just use the ones that you have today, stop buying it from the current vendor, and then transition over to the new vendor as soon as your sort of reorder point triggers. The other aspect is where you can do a one-time conversion. So if, let's say, you have really limited inventory left and it makes no sense for you to actually wait till you consume everything up, in those cases you actually do, you do a one-time conversion. This is also used, this one-time conversion is also used in cases where the product or item that you're trying to transition over is a critical bottleneck item. So what that basically means is that if you don't have that product, your line can actually stop. So you don't want to be in that situation. So in those cases, it makes sense to actually do a one-time conversion. So which one to choose, I will leave that to you based on your scenario. But the idea is that you want to actually keep this in your back pocket to understand what is the best strategy so that you can keep the total cost of ownership low and keep the implementation cost low. So the next piece of the implementation best practices is the implementation team. So you need to understand who are the different stakeholders that you need to involve from your side. And you also need to understand who are the stakeholders from the vendor side, because you want to make sure you have a focused team that is focused on the implementation, understand what needs to happen, and understand the sequence of steps that in there. You also need to define or determine who's the point of contact. So if, let's say, you are the sourcing manager, you need to decide if you're the point of contact or it makes sense for the stakeholder that is going to be overseeing that particular area is the point of contact and you become the secondary point of contact. So you can decide how that works. But the important thing is to ensure that you have a single point of communication. So that way, they're not blasting, the vendor is not blasting an email to 5 different people and hoping someone to respond. They know that this is one person that they need to reach out to. And if, let's say, if you're looking to onboard services where you are going to get more staffing coming into you to fulfill a certain service, then you need to understand how and when they will be onboarded. So what that basically means is if, let's say, you're trying to build out a distribution supplier model and the supplier staff is going to be on site at your site, then you need to understand if they already have existing people that are going to join your company and be a contractor, or B, is there going to be a hiring timeframe that they need to fulfill? So you need to understand what that timeframe looks like and be able to plan according to that. And then the key piece is the milestones. So as I said, even in a implementation plan, you'll have different milestones. So you need to understand what each milestone is, what signifies as a success or completion for each milestone, and what is a deliverable for each milestone. So for example, if you're going to do an ERP implementation, the first thing would be to get the raw data dump from the existing system. And that would literally just be data collection as the first stage. And upon getting that, receiving that data, you've completed the first step of that milestone. So again, the milestones can vary. There's no set milestones that you want to have, but what you want to make sure is that you actually have the appropriate checkpoints within your milestones, so that way you can actually make sure that you're progressing towards completing it. And also it gives a good way to report out statuses, because, and I'll go into the communication piece, but you really want to keep people apprised as to how far you are in the implementation, how soon it's going to get completed, and how much you've completed. And sometimes a quick, hey, 50% complete, that sounds much better than saying, hey, we're done with three different milestones and so on. So again, I'll leave that to you. But the important thing is each milestone should have a deliverable, what success looks like, and what is the next stage that we need to go into. And I also mentioned, again, communication's key. So going right into it. So you got to ensure that you have a set communication plan. So you want to make sure that you're determining when you're going to communicate, who will provide the updates, and who all will receive it. And you can also provide an update, kind of add to that further, is that what's going to be the forum. So sometimes you might actually want to have a monthly steering committee meeting where you're talking about the implementation because it's really robust and you're having the frequent conversations. In some cases, it might make sense to have a bi-weekly meeting. So you want to make sure if it's a meeting or if it's an email, but you want to keep everyone involved that has either approved the contract, has signed off on the contract, or is actually going to get impacted by the contract in the loop with your whole overall implementation. So the communication is a key piece. And I've noticed that in many implementations, you might have the best contract, you might have the best pricing, the best savings coming through the whole process, but it fails because there has been a lack of communication and there's basically no idea as to where that is. So communication is key, and it's important to keep everyone apprised because they're nervous because they don't want their day-to-day to get impacted by not having the product or not having the required service on site. So if you're keeping them apprised, they know that things are moving forward. But on the other hand, if something's not working right or something is not in accordance to what was agreed upon, they know who they need to reach out to, which is going to be you. So that is the communication piece of the best practices. Hey guys, so that was today's video, implementation best practices. As I meant, we went quite in depth on the different aspects and the different pitfalls that you can have while you're working through this stage of the project. The implementation does not necessarily have to be always done when you're doing a 7-step sourcing process. In some cases, you might do a spot negotiation and that might require an implementation stage. So you can use this as a quick guide to be able to drive that. But overall, I think the implementation is where the rubber meets the road. It's where you can start realizing the value that you're getting through this whole negotiation process. And it's important that you are keeping everyone apprised. So if you have any questions or comments on the content that's shared here, please post them down below in the comments. I really appreciate you guys coming back, and I look forward to posting more video on this and on the different aspects of supply chain. So with that, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.